Good morning, friends. It's John, and today I want to talk in more detail about developing azaleas through drastic pruning. I've had quite a number of questions from people trying this method here recently, and so I want to try to explain this in a little more detail. I must begin with an apology. I'm not much of an artist with a pencil or paintbrush to start with, but with a mouse in my hand, I'm just dangerous. So please excuse my diagrams here, but I think they'll serve our purpose. Our primary objective is to take the existing branch structure of old, large nursery stock and use that as the foundation to develop a well ramified and well tapered branch structure for an azalea bonsai. So let's imagine we've just picked up a big azalea from a nursery. It's got a great trunk. It's got branches, long branches. It's designed to be landscape, so it's much larger than what we need to do. We're happy with the root base and the trunk, and we think we want to make a small tree, a small bonsai from this piece of material. Um, it has existing branches coming out already, but in most cases these branches are very long. So our very first step, our very first goal is to drastically cut back the branches. At the same time, we're going to drastically cut back the roots so that when this tree is ready, it'll have a good root mass that will fit into a bonsai pot. You can look at the videos about doing the cutback. I use a saw on the roots and I cut the roots back hard. I don't do a lot of cleaning out. Azalea roots are a little different, but today I really want to focus not on the roots but on the branches. The first cut the first cuts we make are going to be the bases of our primary branches. So one of the things we need to keep in mind is how far out do we want that branch to go before it starts to taper. Azaleas grow these straight long branches that don't have a lot of taper. So my suggestion is that you don't cut further out than about 2 inches. Now that's a rough estimate. You could do 2.5 or 3 or an inch and a half, but the heaviest branches are probably going to be cut a little bit longer. The narrower branches are going to be cut a little bit shorter. So let's imagine we've cut our first branch. You can see now that I made this first cut, and you can imagine in this drawing this is about 2 inches. So I've cut that branch off. I'm going to seal this end because this is, I'm imagining this branch is the size of my finger. So it's important that I seal that so that I get good budding here. So now I'm ready to cut my second branch, and then my third and fourth branches. You notice here I had a short segment before this one started to taper, so I chose not to cut it here. I went ahead and chose to cut it at maybe a secondary level because I liked where it already divided into 2 branches, so I was starting to get some taper. So your first drastic cutback's not going to take more than about 5 minutes. Use a saw. Don't use pruners. You'll damage the branches if you use pruners. Use a saw and make these nice straight cuts. All right, and seal these cuts. After the first growing period, what's going to happen is all of these branches are going to bud and they're going to grow like crazy. Typically, I let the first budding out go 1 full growing season, but that may vary depending on where you're at. You may have to go 2 growing seasons. I get a lot out of a growing season in South Carolina, but what I want to do is I want to just let these branches grow, and I can prune off any that I know I won't use. But the next step will be after these have extended to a distance where I'm happy with the base where they're connecting, I'm going to come back in and I'm going to prune or remove some of the stubs at the end because they're never going to grow buds perfectly at the end. So you're going to have to clean that up a little bit. So here's kind of what that looks like. So you see I went from the stubbed off ends now, and now I have cut back, not always in a straight line, to create a better transition between the primary part of the branch and the secondary part of the branch. After I've done this, I'm going to go ahead and cut these branches. So this is what it would look like. So for me, this would be at the end of the first growing season, or maybe at the beginning of the second growing season, just depending on when I get to it. Shortly thereafter, it's going to look like this. You're going to get new branches coming out, and you're going to have that same issue. They're going to come out from all different places on these secondary branches that you've left, and you're going to have to clean up the ends at some point. Don't do this at the beginning because you don't know where these branches are going to come out at. So you just leave them. And we talked about 2 inches for this first primary. So let's reduce that length for the next one. We're trying to build taper. So if it were 2 inches, 2 inches, 2 inches, it's gonna look funny. So I like to reduce it. So 2 inches, 1.5, 1 to 1.5 inches in the next one, and then an inch to maybe 3/4 of an inch in the next one. So it's grown out. It's time for it to be pruned again. So now I've pruned it back. So now I have my primary branches, the beginnings of my secondary branches. These branches are going to continue to grow and improve the transition as they develop out here. So you don't have to have this perfect when you cut back, because by the time you go 2 or 3 more levels of branching out here, or ramification out here, these transitions will get better and better with time. So now it's time to let it grow again. All right, and so now I've got tertiary and the 4th level ramification growing out here. I will repeat this process, and this can go, because I don't have to let these branches get as big, I'll prune these 2 or 3 times in the same growing season. Your mileage may vary depending on how strong your growing seasons are. If it, I wouldn't, I guess you're just going to have to determine yourself how fast it's growing. But I let these things grow out 2 to 3 inches. The leaves will harden off, the branch will start to harden off, and then I'll usually cut it back to 1 or 2 leaves. And then it's going to bud from the base of those leaves, and I'll get new branches, and again I'll cut it out. Each time I make a cut, I'm just going to reiterate this, but each time I make a cut, it's going to be a shorter distance than the previous cut. So I had about a 2-inch cut here, and then an 1.5 inch cut here, and then about an inch here, and then it'll go down from here, 3/4 and then a half. And that's just general. Those are just guidelines. They don't have to be specific. So, but if you leave branches too long, you're wasting time, because you're going to say, oh, that branch is too long, I need to cut it back, and now you're a season behind. So I would be brave and make hard cuts to start with. So okay, I hope that explains it. We can go back over that again kind of quickly here. You're going to start with the whole tree. These are going to be the bases. So these are going to be the bases of your primary branches. When you cut those off, you're going to end up looking something like this. Then it's going to grow. After it grows, you're going to clean up the stub ends where it didn't clean up, it didn't grow all the way to the end. I will seal these stubs as well. From this point, I don't seal anymore. Prune it, let it grow. Prune it, let it grow. And before long, you will have a very ramified very ramified and tapering branches on your big azalea. So in about 3 to 4 years in my growing season, I think I can create a reasonable azalea with this method, a reasonable bonsai azalea with this method. So for those of you giving it a shot, be brave, cut the branches way back. One of the other things, I've done most of my pruning on satsukis or late bloomers. They seem to respond very well. I've also done some on kurumes and some of the other early bloomers, and they will respond, but sometimes I don't get as many buds from those as I do the satsukis. So know that this method is best for satsukis or late bloomers. It can be used on early bloomers, and I've done it successfully, but they just don't seem to respond quite as strongly. Okay guys, I hope that's been helpful. Hey guys, this is John, and I'm here working on a piece of difficult material. This is Yopon holly. I bought it a few years ago as nursery stock, and it was really large. And I cut it back. And I didn't really make a lot of decisions on branches at that time. I just cut it back, and now it's filled back in. And as I've looked at it the last couple of years, I think that it needs to make a smaller tree. Okay, so I need to bring it down even smaller. That'll make this base look even more powerful than it does when this tree is taller. So there are a few odd branches on it. Now, I started by saying it was difficult material. There's some branches that just don't feel natural to me. So as I'm looking at these branches, there's a couple branches that just feel a little odd to me. They don't feel like they're placed right. This is one of them. It just kind of has a upside down shoulder here kind of and goes up. So I need to figure out what to do with that. What part is that going to play in the design? There's also another difficult branch here. It's super straight. You know, the placement's not so bad, but it's just really straight going up there. So I need to figure out what to do with that. It's going to make a couple pretty big scars, but I think when I'm finished here, I'll have a tree that's maybe hand high, and there won't be a lot of foliage left on it. This is going to be another really drastic cutback. Okay, so I'm looking at the trunk, and I think this is going to end up being the back side of the tree, and this is going to be the front side, and I'll use this as the main apex. So I think what I'm going to do now is take my pruners and go ahead and remove some of the material that is just in the way and is going to be removed. So this should go pretty quickly. I'm still leaving some of this stuff longer than what I need to leave it. I just want to get the tree down to a point where I can really see it and begin to figure out what I'm going to do. That branch just has to come off. So I'm just going to take it off right here, and then I'll come back with the saw and the concave cutters. In fact, I'm going to need the saw on that one. That one's too big. Years ago, I would have been tempted to leave these branches long and think that I could develop the branches back in. But I've learned over the time, just through experience, that, you know, I leave the length stub where I want the next level of ramification to come from. Because if I leave it this long, it's gonna bud out here at the end, and the next level of ramification is gonna be out here at the end. So I want this branch. You know, this is the primary. I want the secondary branches to come off at this point, not further out, but right here where the stub is. So I'll seal these before I'm all done. And this is Yopon holly, so it'll bud back like crazy. All right, so this branch is on the inside of a curve, so I'm going to take it out.
Alright, I still think this one's a little long. See if I can hit the camera now. Oh! Now I'm going to go back and just clean up a few of these cuts, and now that I've roughed them out, I'll try to clean them up, and then I'll put cut paste on them. I still have to decide what to do here, and this guy's just coming off. Alright, if I left this wound out like this, it would even bulge more as it healed. I'm going to use my knob cutter to hollow this out a little bit so that as this heals, it stays about the same level as it is now. This would also be a good, you could also use a Dremel tool here and carve this out nicely. Depending on how hard the wood of the tree is, this can be a task. You just have to do it by taking small bites. Alright, I do think I'm going to get my Dremel and hollow that out a little bit. I think that's still too long. In fact, I'm sure it's too long. Okay, here I have a choice. I have a big stub or I have a smaller stub. Well, always you're trying to build taper, so I know over time this branch is going to end up getting much larger, and this one's also going to get larger. So I think since I can make a choice here, I'm going to take the big stub out and leave the smaller stub. Here and here, I just have what I have to work with. I could take those down all the way and let it totally rebud down to one trunk line or one line, but I think that would leave so many scars on the tree, it'd never look that great. So we'll go like this and just see how it turns out. This will require another really hard work through after it has budded back out. What you'll do is where it has budded, you'll come back and clean up these scars so that you create the taper so it looks natural as it continues out the branch. It's tempting to try to clean up these stubs now, but it's better to wait until you have the buds, and then you'll know exactly what to cut and what not to cut. Okay, this is a little more than a Dremel tool, but this was handy and it had a nice heavy bit on it. This is a long shaft die grinder, and I'll really have to make sure I hold it steady so that I don't let it jump out and get some of the bark. But alright, just that amount of little hollow right there will help this heal more naturally and it won't stick out so much. So, and this one here, I'm afraid if I take this down as far as this branch, that I'll put this branch in jeopardy. So I think I'm going to carve this out a little bit more, and maybe even down the side here, like maybe a large branch was broken off here at one time. So. So that's just a rough start. I'll come back with some gouges and try to clean that up a little bit and try to make it a little more natural looking. So now, what I want to happen is I want the live tissue to roll over this. And then you'll just see that I'll keep it opened up so that it looks like an old branch broken off there from a storm or something. Okay, for now we're pretty much finished, except for the fact that it's time to go ahead and get this out of this, this is probably a 5-gallon pot, I don't know, large container, get the roots down. We've reduced 99% of the foliage. Now would be a great time to go ahead and reduce the roots at the same time. I've done this before with this kind of holly tree, and they respond very well. You would need to be careful with some species, but with this species, I think we can get away with this, even though it's July. Aftercare will be very important, but I'm going to take the saw to this, and we're going to saw the bottom, saw the roots off, and get it so we can put it in a container. So I found a pot I want to use. This is more like a training kind of pot. So I'm going to prepare the pot. You see it's got a great big hole in the bottom. It's also got 4 small holes. That's for the wire. So I need to put some, so the bonsai soil won't come out, I need to put some of this little plastic mesh in the bottom. So I'm going to do that real quick, and you can kind of watch and see as I do it here. Cut the wire a little long, so I'll trim the ends. And while the pot's upside down, I'll go ahead and feed my tie-down wires. Just want to get them snug across the bottom. Okay, that's what goes into prepping a pot, getting it ready. You always want to tie the tree in. You don't want the wind to be blowing the tree and moving the new roots or breaking the root tips off. That's a great way to lose a plant quickly. So since we do grow in containers, it's important to secure the plant into the container. So now I'll add some soil. I'm going to finish root pruning the tree. You know, you saw me saw it off. Now I need to clean up the edges a little bit. And actually make it so it'll fit into this pot. It's still a little bit large for this pot. Then I'll add soil, get the tree secured in with the wires, and then finish with the soil. So we move on. I just want to clean up the edges of the roots a little bit. Get any of these roots that have been winding around the pot cut back. I'm getting some of the old soil out of the tree. The last thing I'll do is spray it with a water hose and really get it cleaned up. So that's about all I'll do on these upper edges. I'll do the same thing across the bottom here. As you can see, is a fair amount. You'll be able to see it better once I wash it. I'm going to go ahead and prune here. So nice clean cuts on these root tips. That's important. They'll tend to come back faster if you've got good clean. So keep your root shears sharp. All right, time for a spray. See, we really didn't cut through that many roots there. There's a couple roots that were growing sideways that we cut through long ways, but the other ones were pretty small. They weren't that huge. So you can see they're like the branches, the roots ramify pretty quickly. So you can get away with cutting it back like we just did. All right, we'll check it in the pot now. All right, that looks good. That'll fit no problem. Plenty of room to grow in there. In fact, I'll probably have it so it's raised up a little bit more. So now it's time for some soil. It's sifted decomposed pine bark, turfus, and a little bit of decomposed granite that I strain out at the river. That's my basics of bonsai soil mix. You want to make sure you get good contact in this situation because this is cut so flat. I don't want any pockets of air under there, so I really want to twist the tree around, twist the tree around a little bit. Make sure I've got good contact. Now I add a little bit more soil and I'll tie down the wires to secure the tree there. I don't put the cut paste on until the end because I'm still handling the tree. And I'll end up with it all over my fingers. So. I use the chopsticks just to settle the soil down in between the roots. And once again, to make sure there are no air pockets. You don't want any pockets of air. You know, you need soil that breathes and that oxygen moves through and air moves through, but you don't want any big pockets. Just securing the wires down to make sure the tree's snug in the pot. Typically, I like to be able to pick the tree up by the trunk. I don't do that all the time, but that's how secure I like to have the tree in the pot. I really should have used a little heavier wire since this is kind of a heavy tree in a big pot, so I'm not going to, well, loosened it up. So. Okay, I've been looking at this tree and looking at this tree, and this is where I originally thought the front was. I'm not sure if it's not going to be more interesting from over here, but this stump keeps bothering me. It's growing out of the inside of this big curve here. It also creates a little reverse taper. So I think I've done so much to this tree, now's the time to go ahead and fix this. So I'm going to cut this stump out completely, and hopefully another branch will sprout right there. That would be perfect. But that wouldn't be inside the curve. This is really inside the curve, and as I said, it kind of creates some reverse taper. So I'm going to do I'm going to cut it two different ways. I'm going to cut in, and then I'm going to cut down. Alright, so that was the sideways cut. Now I'm going to cut down. I'm just going to kind of take an L-shaped chunk out of here, and then I'll clean it up with the, probably with the grinder. So that really improves the taper on this tree. And even after it's cleaned up, it'll look even better. If you're going to do it, you might as well do it. Time to soak it good, and then we'll put cut paste on it. Paste. I use the Play-Doh-like clay type of Japanese cut paste. I've just always had good success with it. And the most important thing to do when you're putting cut paste on is make sure that the edges are sealed, or not really sealed, but are protected and maintained moist. If they dry out, the wound's not going to heal. So that's my reason for using cut paste, is to make sure that those edges where I have left a nice clean cut will begin to heal and roll over, callus over. The secret to putting on cut paste is to having a wet fingertip. It's got to be wetter than what the tree is. The cut paste sticks to the drier surface. So as long as your finger's moist and wet, you're good to go. Now, I could seal this whole little area, but I think I'm just going to seal the edges because that's the part that's important. I'm using way more cut paste than I really need. But that's fine. Once it starts to callus underneath, this cut paste will crack and split apart. It becomes obvious, and at that point you can just remove it. So, because it's done its job. Once it starts to heal over, you don't need the cut paste anymore. So. Last step, especially aftercare is everything with these guys. I'm going to add just a fine layer of sphagnum moss, maybe an eighth, a quarter inch thick, what this does basically is just help the tree maintain moisture. This soil is pretty free draining. You probably saw that while I was watering it, and this will help maintain a level of moisture to help this tree recover. Once it's recovered and established in the pot, it doesn't need this anymore. Last little trick I do is I use my thumb on the edge of the soil surface to indent the soil a little bit lower than the edge of the pot. That way, when you're watering it, the water tends to hit that edge and go down and not over. Alright, there you go. That's a drastic reduction of both the top of the plant and the roots. This was Yopon holly. We left a few leaves on there. But now you can see this tree, which was originally from a nursery and was probably 3 foot in diameter and better than 3 foot tall. Now it's going to end up making almost a show hen sized tree, so a small sized tree. But it's going to have a super powerful trunk. So this is to me, this is a really good example of you've got to get the trunk you want before you ever put it in a bonsai pot. So now that I have a trunk line, I've got big base and nice roots, I'll start developing the branches. So if I'd have put this little stick in a pot, in a bonsai pot, and expected it to grow over the years, it never would have happened. You have to find them big and use the subtraction method of bonsai and reduce them and regrow them. So there you go, that's it. May never be a super tree, but it'll be alright.
Okay, most of my trees are bonsai, but the Chinese art, which preceded the Japanese art of bonsai, is called penjing, and it's much older. And penjing seek to make a social or an artistic statement, and I can give you a few examples. This tree here, with these 3 figures in the realm of penjing, making a social statement, and I'm the artist who put this together. So the statement I attribute to this is that the age of the oldest man is but a moment in the life of a great tree. See, that's a social statement, and that's what this artistic piece is representing. Here's another one here, which is a bit overgrown, but you can see there's a house there, and there's a path, and there's a man walking along the path.
It's a little fatter than the others.
Yeah.
Is he like a merchant?
Yes.
Not harming us.
The social statement that I attribute to that is that in the evening, the road home is the longer road. Another little tiny one. And this simply says, on the great stage of nature, man plays but an insignificant role.
There's quite a lot of detail on these figures when you come close.
Yeah. Here's another one here on this white marble slab with the boats in the harbor. Mm-hmm. And the meaning of that I attribute to it, that I express through it, is at the end of the day, everyone needs a safe harbor. So there are the boats coming into the safe harbor. Yeah, there's a little leaf here that shouldn't be here. Gets in the way.
Very beautiful. That's one of my favorite ones.
That's the concept of penjing, that it makes some sort of an artistic statement. Whereas, if you go to bonsai, and here's happens to be a trident maple. Now, it happens to be growing on a rock, just so that we can see the unusual development of the roots over the rock.
It sort of shows them off because they're not underground.
Yeah.
Wow. All that texture. That's what Japanese are always really good at. It's like the finishing.
It's about 75 years old. When I got it, there's a story behind this. There's a story behind most of my trees. I'm a friend of Gail Ortiz, who owns Gail's Bakery in Capitola.
Oh, yeah.
And she was the mayor of Capitola at one time. Well, Gail and I know each other for many years. One day she said to me, Robert, I have this boxwood in a rental of mine, and it's right in the middle of the lawn. And every time the gardener comes, he's annoyed because he has to mow around it. I would like it removed. Maybe you'd be interested in it. Well, I went and I looked, and when I saw the bottom display of roots of this tree, which was then about 60-something years old, I said, "Boy, that's magnificent for a bonsai." These are called nebari, which is the Japanese word for roots. And the display of the roots demonstrate the trees hugging and grasping into the earth, and that's very desirable in bonsai, those nebari grasping into the earth. Well, the tree, of course, was about 6 feet tall, and I cut it down and then regrew it and shaped it into the form of a very mature, this is sort of in the form of an oak tree, but it's a Japanese boxwood, and it's, I think, one of my better trees. This is another boxwood that I got somewhere else, and this is called a windswept design, and this is represents some trees. It's a Japanese design, windswept. Represents trees that perhaps grow along the rocky coast of Japan or California, and the constant wind growing in one direction caused the trees to be bent and growing in a single direction.
Like the Pacific Grove cypress, sort of.
Sure,
Yeah.
that sort of thing.
Anything last?
And it goes on. Well, this has flowers. It's a pomegranate. And when it goes into a pot, then it'll be a bonsai, because bonsai means tree in a pot.
Huh.
This is a plastic pot, so plastic doesn't count.
Does it have such a simple meaning in Chinese, too?
Benjing, yes, means plant in a tray.